In order to find out more about the rise of Islamist movements in the Middle East, I've come to a city that for decades has been a refuge for those labeled terrorists in the West. The Palestine Liberation Organization was based here in the 1970s. After the killing of 11 Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics, the PLO was seen by the West as the first international terrorist movement. But the PLO was not Islamist. Its roots were secular and socialist. In Lebanon today, Hezbollah, the Party of God, has taken on the mantle of the PLO as the major challenger to Israel and Western influence in the region. In Beirut's southern suburbs, Hezbollah is also the effective government, but it's listed as a terrorist organization in the United States. I've come to meet an old friend, Younes Aoudeh. In his youth, he was a fighter for the PLO. He's taking me to a restaurant with a curious menu. The meals celebrate weapons used by those labeled terrorists in the West. Younes was well acquainted with the menu. As a PLO fighter, he'd received training in the Soviet Union in guerrilla warfare. What are you having on the menu? The terrorist meal?
No, I am going for a cornet. It's designed for blowing up Israeli tanks.
I did. Oh, it comes under a helmet. This is a cornet. Oh, there's my RPG. Fantastic. Younes left the PLO when its leaders fled Lebanon after Israel's invasion in 1982. He believes that secular politicians in the Middle East have been corrupted by the West and failed their people.
People have been frustrated by their past experiences. The political model offered by Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Islamic Jihad movement has provided a successful example of how a liberation struggle can free land and people. Unlike other groups, they turn their slogans into reality.
Some Arabs followed communism, others secularism and Western ways. But in the end, they failed. They only brought weakness and destruction to their people. People are returning to Islam because Islam does not accept occupation and oppression.
Lebanon's role as a crucible of rebellion largely stems from its proximity to Israel. Tens of thousands of Palestinians sought refuge here when the Jewish state was formed in 1948. I'm on my way to the largest Palestinian camp in Lebanon, Ain el-Helway. It's got more than 70,000 people stuffed into 1 square kilometer. It's also a cauldron for the much wider debate as to what methods should be used by people everywhere to oppose occupation. If Palestinians threaten a violent challenge to Israel, they are labeled terrorists. Yet Israel's military dominance is bankrolled by the United States. The West's war on terror is asking the Palestinian nation to remain weak and bow to the superior military power of Israel and the United States. In this camp, support for the PLO has been falling. Yasser Arafat's fading images have become symbols of frustration and impotence. There's an increasing feeling in this camp that their cause is not simply the struggle for Palestinian statehood. It's a wider conflict shared by Muslims elsewhere against those who are denying them the ability to control their future, the West. Assalamu alaikum. I've come to meet Palestinian fighters who say their enemy is not simply Israel, but also Western forces occupying other Muslim lands.
Almighty God has allowed the Palestinians to return to their faith. If they want to liberate their country, they will do it through Islam, not with the PLO.
These fighters believe Palestinians share a liberation struggle with the Taliban in Afghanistan. They are inspired by Osama bin Laden.
We truly ask the Almighty God that we serve at his feet. He is a mujahid who deserves to be our brother. That is the highest praise I can give.
Gandhi believes that all Muslims, including Palestinians, should follow the Taliban commander, Mullah Omar.
From Afghanistan?
Yes, Mullah Omar. My love, Mullah Omar.
The West's response to 9/11 has allowed the idea to thrive in the Muslim world that the war on terror is a war on Islam. To understand how this has been used by Al-Qaeda to justify the deliberate murder of civilians, I arranged a rendezvous with a man who's wanted by several Western governments.
He was a close associate of the man responsible for the first World Trade Center attack, the Egyptian Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman.
One of his aliases is Abu Haytham. In his view, if the bodies of dead civilians are counted, then the West stands accused of the mass murder of Muslims.
If you just look at Iraq, even before the invasion, just during the embargo and the no-fly zone and all that, the whole world knew that about 1 million Iraqi children have died because of that. Since that time, the Americans have killed thousands more of Iraqis and thousands more of Muslims in Afghanistan and Pakistan and other places. Sheikh Osama bin Laden, may Allah preserve him, he said we need to kill 4 million before we're even. 4 million from the West before we're even.
If you look at who's responsible for more innocent civilian deaths, for example, if you put George Bush and Tony Blair on one hand and Osama bin Laden on the other, who do you think has caused the greatest number?
Oh, certainly the greater number of deaths came in totality of the war. But I think you have to look at the political aim. Osama bin Laden was out to do as much damage as he could to Americans, American interests, and many other foreign interests, and continues unabated to this day to try to bring down Saudi Arabia, many other Middle Eastern governments, and the United States. The aims of Mr. Bush and Mr. Blair, I think, were very moral ones in their design. Now, in carrying them out, I would not argue with you.
That is true, and civilians die. Civilians die, innocent civilians die when military action is taken, and that has always been the case in war. But I think for most ordinary people today, they find the notion of a terrorist act definable, the deliberate targeting of innocent civilians. They find it abhorrent, and they find this way of doing it new.
But there's nothing new about American servicemen fighting wars on foreign soil. During the last century, every generation of Americans has been at war. At the Arlington National Cemetery near Washington, rows of simple graves mark the sacrifice of those who have perished in distant wars. Many died with a genuine belief that America is making the world a better place. During the 20th century, the United States claimed an historic role to lead and export its values around the globe. The war on terror was an attempt to ensure that America would remain the dominant world power in the 21st century, but it is faltering. The Muslim world is rejecting the global dominance of Western values and standing up to the might of the United States.
There's a consequence to things that you do. People don't just collapse and say, "Thank you, please cut my throat." You know, so yes, you get reactions.
People fight back.
So often they fight back, and in the case of say 9/11, which was a major terrorist act, of course, no serious analyst has any doubt about the fact that it's a consequence of U.S. policies in the Middle East.
The decision of a government to refuse to negotiate with those listed as terrorists is usually based on simple self-interest.
The reason why they do not want to talk is because they know what the answer is. The answer is that they have to give something. The reason why they're occupying certain places, it could be for oil, it could be for territory, it could be increasingly for water, whatever. That's why people do not want to debate. It's the people in power who do not want to debate, not the people who are oppressed.
Before the war on terror can have its Armistice Day, the West will need to negotiate with people it now considers terrorists. And it must recognize that where there is injustice, the right to resist power is as legitimate now as it has ever been.